Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I am your host. Okay, so this is going to be a jam-packed episode. Not only do we have a lot of reviews for new releases that, well, were actually pretty fun this week, and some not so fun ones, but we'll get to those later. But we also have a lot of what did I watch reviews, including 2 movies and, of course, Gotham, and if we have time, maybe Deadly Class. I'm still wafting on that. When I edit it in, we'll see if it's there. But anyway, let's move on into the news. Let's start off with movie news with the obvious first thing, which is the release of the new Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, which is the second MCU Spider-Man movie, because now there's so many Spider movies, it's kind of insane. But that doesn't really detract from how this movie looks kind of fun. I mean, I don't really see it being better than Homecoming, or at least doing anything more interesting than Homecoming. And Homecoming was okay, and I have a feeling this will be okay too. I'm just kind of not interested because it doesn't seem like it's doing much to further the mythology other than having Mysterio and villains that we haven't seen on screen before, because it's set far away from New York and it's set so far away from any other kind of subplots, it seems, because it's not doing anything with the Scorpion subplot, it's not doing anything with Vulture again, and it doesn't seem like it's furthering for the cause of Tom Holland's place in the MCU kind of as a whole. It just seems like a one-off London adventure, and that just comes off as lame. But overall, it looks like a fun time, and I'm pretty sure that Jake Gyllenhaal is gonna knock it out of the park as Mysterio. I'm just not really anticipating it that much because it feels like such a one and done kind of deal, and given how past movies have kind of fared with that, like Ant-Man and the Wasp or Doctor Strange, then this feels like it could go the way of those, and that's a shame. That really is a shame. But anyway, the trailer was okay, and fingers crossed that it's actually really substantial and decent. Next up would be the news that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is going to be undergoing another reboot in light of the failure of TMNT Out of the Shadows, which is unsurprising because that movie was terrible, and it's a shame because while the previous Bay Turtles movie wasn't great, it also wasn't terrible, and it had a lot of things they could have built off from. But then you have Out of the Shadows, which seems to only care about pandering to the 80s cartoon and then not doing anything that actually fed into the story, and that was a shame, and it really hampered that movie and made it an entirely awful movie. So I'm not surprised that we're having another reboot, but fingers crossed that this new one turns out okay. Lastly, in movie news, we have a resurgence in rumors that the New Gods movie is going to be centered solely around Mr. Miracle and Big Barda as the central characters, which just makes me wonder why they don't just call it Mr. Miracle. Come on, that's the actual title of the actual book, where these two were the central characters. If it's good, and if it's fun, and if it's really entertaining, and actually going to be able to hold interest, unlike A Wrinkle in Time, then no one will give a shit that you call the movie Mr. Miracle. So fingers crossed that it turns out okay. I'm not seeing anything yet that makes me think that it will turn out to be anything other than trash though. And this is actually breaking news, so I'm going to have to edit it into the movie news right now. So if it seems a bit off quality-wise, that's it. But apparently WB is planning on a Harley Quinn movie trilogy, starting with Birds of Prey, then Gotham City Sirens, then Birds of Prey versus Gotham City Sirens. Hopefully that turns out okay. I've never had a problem with the DCU version of Harley Quinn as a whole. I think that she was just ruined in editing for Suicide Squad. The performance was there, the acting was there, the writing was also there. I will fight anyone who says it wasn't. But then it's chopped up and made entirely nonsensical. So fingers crossed that's not what happens here, and that they have a great and steady character arc planned out, but who knows at WB right now. And anyway, let's move on into television news. We have the first trailer for season 2 of Happy. Now, I only saw season 1 of Happy way after the fact because I did not enjoy the comic at all, and I thought it was really boring and muddled, but the show itself was actually really entertaining. The only part I didn't like was how it changed the ending to be a little bit more happier and optimistic, because it felt like despite how much it changed already, the ending of the comic, which is a lot more dour but also a little bit bittersweet, would have been such a great button to have for the show. And they just kind of swerved around that. So I was always kind of cautious about a second season because it doesn't seem like a lot of pieces are in place to really sort of facilitate that and make that feel natural. But the trailer itself is actually pretty entertaining, and it shows a lot of great set pieces and shows that it's keeping the same kind of humor. My only sort of worry is that it seems to be winking too much at itself. Like, oh yeah, we're going through this again. It's a sequel. And that feels unnecessary because it's already riding such a high that this is just kind of pushing it over to an edge and over sort of a distance that doesn't really need to be, because it's already humorous and it's already kind of self-aware to an extent, and this feels like it's just chipping away the foundation of it. It's hard to get emotionally engaged if it's making too much fun of itself. But other than that, I love Christopher Meloni in this role. I think he plays such a great bastard, even if he does have such a blunt, stereotypical, gruff voice that I have a distaste for usually. I think he carries it very well. And the whole gimmick of new season, new holiday, seems like they could go at this for a long time. And if they ever make a Halloween season, I'll be there too, because that seems like a natural fit, especially since the first season introduced this whole heaven, hell, demonic kind of bullshit. And I feel like that would be the perfect conclusion or cap off to send this series. You go all cult and stuff. So yeah, fingers crossed. And I can't wait for that. Anyway, that's it for television news. Let's head on straight into comic news and see what's what. The first thing that pops to mind is that apparently Jeff Lemire tweeted an update on Inferior 5, his long in purgatory miniseries with Keith Giffen, telling sort of a period piece of the DCU in the 1980s about a bunch of kids who become the new Inferior 5 in order to investigate strange goings on in their small town in the wake of the iconic Dominators invasion storyline. And well, that's about it. That's all we heard of it, like 2 years now. Apparently there was also going to be a backup by Lemire and drawn by him featuring the Peacemaker, which looked amazing. And I love the tagline. The tagline was, he loves peace so much he's willing to kill for it. And that just grabbed at me immediately, and I can't wait for it. And it's been such a long wait. It really has. Apparently he tweeted out an update and I didn't get to see it. One of my mutuals actually did tweet it. I got a notification. I went to go read it and it was deleted, so I guess it was some sensitive type stuff. But I hope it was something good, because I have been anticipating this series for a long time and I can't wait for it to come out. Alright, so let's move on into what I read this week, and it's gonna be kind of a doozy. Let's just try and do some hot shots takes and let's go for it. Alright, so first things first, we have Damn Comics number 3 from the ever incomparable Illuminated, and I have to say, this is probably the best installment so far. Not only does it feel like the most fulfilling and satisfying chapter in terms of Hero Maker, which has never really had much of a problem in that department overall, but even now is finally hitting a nice groove with me. Hero Maker, for its own part, has been my favorite, but this one struck a nicer chord with me, mainly because each part before this just felt like more of a snippet of the overall story, which of course each of them are, but because I'm so into it, it just kind of feels a little bit jarring at the end, because like I want more and it stopped right now and makes me a bit more anxious about it. This one had a better self-sustaining tone to it, probably because it's centered around a definite punchline and joke, so when it hits that mark and it actually, you know, pulls the trigger on the overall joke, it feels like it's coming to a natural end, even if the story is ongoing and even if I am still anticipating more of it. Like with Now, while it doesn't quite hit that same balance between being internally enclosed, which it doesn't really have to, again, these are all snippets of stories, and well, that just comes with the territory. I mean, even with 2000 AD, there's some stories that only have like 2 pages for that week, so it's not something to really harp in on, but it's still very capable of hooking you in, and the mystique-driven and fueled monologues were definitely well placed, and more importantly, well paced. It's something that I really enjoyed here and there in Illuminated's work before, but the cadences with the speeches can be really tricky to pull off in other stories. And the final beats here and now just come through as well being a lot more significant and engaging. So it's something that really jived with me and made me really excited and amped up. For everything that I might say about Now, one of the best things is that it feels so strident about itself. And moments like the first couple of chapters, which sort of just rush to you and smack you in the face with just how powerful the pages and execution of the stylistic tendencies and like overcharged atmosphere of the series so far can be. You also have to have that amount of smooth bluntness concerning the main drama, and that's what that monologue at the end does for me. It feels like, yes, we're going somewhere, and it's like this powerful roller coaster ride so far, and I'm really enjoying it. So overall, 2 thumbs up, and the wait for number 4 is going to be hell, but it's a trip I can't wait to go on. Moving on to Red Hood Outlaw, and I'm gonna be honest, I only read this one because of a spoiler I saw that made me interested in where this is going. Before I get to that though, I just want to say that while it's still not my thing and I'm still not gonna be picking it up, The whole structure of this arc so far, and it's dealing with Jason's dad and his role as this big shadowy overfigure since the start of Rebirth, is actually kind of well done. I feel like this is something that could have been tightened up a whole lot since the start of this new status quo, but it makes sense that the dealing of this would be a solo Jason ordeal, and Lobdell's pinpointing nature keeps it afloat. Not that engaging, but I can see the climax being something I'll check out. Now, for the reason I checked this issue out was that apparently I heard a few characters I've been waiting around for actually did pop up. Not only do we get a one-page aside of Bizarro and Artemis still fighting their way through the dark multiverse, but apparently Bunker has been holed up in some lab as some test rat in a tube. It's just great seeing them all again, and I hope that things intersect and coalesce sooner now. Although I will admit, I do think it's a missed opportunity to not have the Bizarro and Artemis adventures actually being shown. It's good that they're not forgotten, and fingers crossed that Bunker gets to be a GL equivalent if the Outlaws do come back soon, but I think that could have been a really strong subplot and kind of helped buttress a lot of the flaws so far in the solo Jason arc. But overall, 2 thumbs middle. It's still kind of decent, but still not riding the same highs. Next up we have Captain Ginger number 4, which is a bit of an odd duck, mainly because it's the end of the story arc, but only 4 issues in, and usually that's not a bad thing, and everything really is wrapped up capably enough, but this could have had so much more meat and weight to it. Taken as a whole, the arc feels so lopsided. The first issues are very dramatic and tense, and the last 2 feeling more like summaries or quick recaps of where things were going. I don't know, they're fine, but the drama could have been filled up at least 2 more issues, or even more. There was a lot of branches they could have taken with this, and so it just feels a little bit empty without it. This plays more fast and loose, and while still enjoyable, it does fall a lot shorter from where it started. The last page hook that seems to be setting up the second arc feels less interesting because it sets up something despite the current status quo not being developed to its fullest potential. Yet I hope it handles the transition well enough. It's still a good series in any case. 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. Alright. Now here we go with Lodger number 3, and with this 3rd issue, it's nice to finally know that the first issue was just a fluke and that this is actually a series where Lapham is right in the middle of his regular groove. It not only continues the tone of the second issue where it feels more at home and more skilled at being a darkly comedic crime dramedy and playing with the familiar cliches, but it also opens up the characters a lot more to fit into that. The veils that were keeping both the Lodger and Ricky at a distance to the reader are completely dispelled here, and for the better of the comic, honestly. It makes them so much more entertaining to watch and to spin in their respective wheels and goals when they're not shadowy, mysterious, or ill-defined. Ricky being capable of being as petty and as vindictive as anyone else, and learning more about the vapid whims of the Lodger make the story pop out more than it ever had before. It's just the same good old fun on the road to destruction that is the keystone to this genre. I am really enjoying it, and I can't wait to see where this all folds down into. 2 thumbs up. Now we're heading the curve into something that I didn't really enjoy that much, which is Scooby Apocalypse number 33, which wasn't that great. I just wish it was winding down the series a lot more than it is, which has been my main concern for the past few months. This issue just more or less drags itself out and has all the substance of maybe a third or half its length. A lot of the pages are wasted on recaps they didn't need or on developing new dramatic pathways that are extremely unnecessary and kind of forced. I don't really have much faith in this series actually coming to a close anytime soon, but if it does, then it better not have more of a journey to there with this bland and boring melodrama it's trying to bring back up again. 1 thumb down, 1 thumb middle. Moving on to The Wicked and the Divine number 41, and it's just a good issue. Another notch in the road to the finale. So every issue right now is about the plot development and in moving toward the beats to that conclusion. In that view, this does that job very well. And like I've said before, the story in itself and the way it goes around is what's drawn me more or less to the series from the start. The characters as pawns in the plot does lead to some nice and entertaining bits and gags for them that they really strut around in. It's not something that is completely satisfying as a single issue read. It exists just to set up one singular thing, but it goes about it in a direct and engaging way that something like Scooby Apocalypse doesn't quite nail as well. So yeah, 2 thumbs up. Moving on into Invaders number 1, which is another Invaders relaunch. The Robinson one was a bit of a dry duck, and this one more or less kind of follows suit. The brief overarching flashbacks of Lenore being traumatized in the war are actually pretty good and are very sort of depthy and emotionally impacting. But the way it ties itself to the present day storyline seems incredibly predictable and cliche. After that, it's not much to write home about and feels very standard. There are some good lines and some good gags, but overall it just seems bogged down by an uninteresting storyline that doesn't really seem to be adding much to anything at all. It's not a total wash, but it seems to be right in the dead center of anything. So yeah, 2 thumbs middle. And finally, we're heading into the last one, which is Hawkman number 8, which I really enjoyed, but I do have some thoughts about. It's a good issue, but it's also a missed opportunity. The great boon of this one is that it's Venditti having finally created his own singular voice and personality for this version of Carter. The entire issue is just a heart-to-heart about his place in the universe and his hang-ups regarding his immortality of a sort, and it's actually incredibly emotionally effective despite the fact that it's just Carter and his Kryptonian incarnation ruminating on their lives, because it does have this impressive Ozymandias tone to it, that poem with "look upon my works" and all that, because it hinges on the tragedy of what do their lives mean if their pursuits, either heroic, professional, or personal, remain forgotten in the ages. It's tragic, it's heartening, and I was actually moved. The downside is that, well, it does miss the opportunity to actually make the Kryptonian Hawkman Nightwing. And if Venditti is really trying to do this whole kind of coalescing and overarching, connecting and binding of the various Hawkman stuff, then that was kind of a clear association he could have did. Whatever, but overall, it's a really great issue, and I love how it has a definite place in the storyline and for Carter's character development in light of the overarching threat. So yeah, that's great, and one of my favorites so far. Definitely 2 thumbs up. Anyway, that's it for what I read this week. Let's move on into spoiler reviews. First things first, I just want to say that I'll be putting a time code below for both these reviews, rating of the Supermen and for Glass. If you go to a time code, you'll be sent to the very end of the review where I'm going to put in a general sort of spoiler-free estimation of the movie. So yeah, but first, let's move on into my review of Reign of the Supermen, starting now. Reign of the Supermen is something that I wish I liked a lot more than I did, because there's so much going for it and it just doesn't hit the mark at all 90% of the time, maybe even more. It makes me even look on something like Superman Doomsday, the previous attempt at adapting this storyline, with some sort of graciousness, because even that had the decency to be a solitary and consistent viewing within itself. To go back to my thoughts on the first part of this double feature, while I did have some issues with it, the Death of Superman direct-to-video movie was an adaptation that understood what the core of the story was about and actually stayed true to it. It might have changed a lot of things around, but it felt in keeping with the atmosphere and themes of the narrative. Reign has no such luck. It's just a messy, cobbled together, and really janky movie. There are some good elements though, but not enough to make it work. The movie barely touches upon the various Supermen, making them more secondary or tertiary characters in a narrative that is more concerned with setting up the next Justice League movie, or with a Lois Lane plot where she investigates LexCorp and Cyborg Superman, the latter of which could have been a fine movie on its own even. If anything, if they were going to be so unfaithful, then that would have been an interesting direction to go into. As it stands, the movie feels pulled apart at the seams, where the actual reign of the 4 replacement Supermen and the return of Superman itself feels unnecessary to the story at hand, and more just there because they had to be included. The movie spends more time building up Darkseid and trumping up his role way too far that it makes everything the characters do so much less interesting than developing the ongoing themes the first part nailed. The only time the movie does feel like it might is in the first couple of scenes, which show Lois and other Superman characters reeling from Clark's death. The rest is just kind of awful, and it shows that Tomasi didn't return to write this one like he did the first one. It's too humorous, with some jokes hitting but a lot others missing or just feeling insanely out of place, with a bunch of character beats that do feel odd at times. I mean, in one particular moment, Wonder Woman actually rebukes Lois's assumption that she's a compassionate person and calls herself a warrior first, or Superboy groping Mercy off screen, and a whole reveal of Cyborg Superman being predicated on the idea that Superman would not mourn a person he couldn't save, and having Superman outright kill Cyborg Superman, but with a lame justification for why he really didn't. I mean, it's such a stretch, and it's just so, like, annoying and irritating to have all these things compounded against each other. It's such a shame because some of the jokes that do land, they are actually kind of funny, and there's a couple of effective beats, but it's too little to make this feel like a natural second half to the story. Even taken as its own thing, it's just so disparate from that first part. And you know what the worst part is? They're doing Darkseid next, and they set it up here, but it seems they're skipping over the only entertaining thing about Darkseid, which was Forever Evil, and god damn it. But yeah, 2 thumbs down. Anyway, here's my spoiler-free review. If you skip to the time code, you should be here. And anyway, here's my spoiler-free take on it. It's a mess of a movie with only a few decent scenes and beats, but comes off more as jail wank than an actual Superman movie, which is a shame because the first one did that so well. And taken as a whole and taken as 2 parts, as an adaptation, it fails in pretty much all regards. So 2 thumbs down. And now let's move on into my review of Glass. If you want to skip ahead to my spoiler-free mini review, look at the time code below, but it's going to start right around now. Alright, so Glass is a movie that hasn't had an easy time at it. It's been savaged by critics and a sizable number of fans of either Unbreakable, Split, or even both. And I can actually understand why. For something so anticipated, it doesn't meet the expectations many held for it. It's not a sequel to Unbreakable. It's not the concluding chapter of a trilogy. It's not even a real movie in its own right. But the one thing it is an epilogue. And it's a pretty damn good one. And I have to say that I near well love this movie. Is it perfect? No, there are some odd M. Night-isms that are prevalent in all of his movies. Some strenuous and blunt dialogue exchanges, superfluous scenes, and all that come with it. But like with the best of his movies, Glass deals with it all in stride. And it is this and more that make it a worthy capstone to his superhero narrative. Just not in the ways everyone wanted, but in all the ways that actually mattered. The movie doesn't set out to be this direct continuation of David Dunn's superheroic adventures. It's been 20 years and the movie knows it. It's more akin to a Last Rodeo or Old Man X style of story. The end of the line and the end of the road. The majority of the movie itself is a reflection and rumination of the legacy the principal characters are leaving behind. David with his heroics, but more importantly, the bond he has fostered with his son, Kevin with his desperate and tragic need for any semblance of safety and security, and Mr. Glass, still on his quest to make sense of the world and of his life. To say it handles all of this well would be an understatement. It handles it, honestly, almost brilliantly. I've heard a lot of complaints that nothing happens in this movie, that they're all trapped in an insane asylum and that drags out and is entirely boring, which might be true if you don't pay attention to the performances or even the weight of each scene they're in. There are some sequences that play out as gripping character vignettes, as each actor, although some more than others, wears their heart and character cores on their sleeves, making for immersive and emotionally impacting moments where the main conflict of the movie, these superhero characters even existing in the real world, is underlined to great effect. It can be somber, it can be humorous, it can be sad, heartening. The middle act is filled to the brim with each and every one of these moods and tones, yet all the same, the movie is not without some real flaws, some of which are important, and some of which are unimportant. And I will address these here. The first thing would be that it's not a real movie, as I've said. It's actually more of a clip show. The movie makes a lot of use of old footage, both in terms of full clips from Split and Unbreakable, to even deleted scenes from Unbreakable. The clips from Split can come off as kinda overplayed, especially near the end where we see moments repeated and repeated. But the moments from Unbreakable are integrated and pushed in some outstanding ways. Yet a clip show doesn't have a real plot in and of itself, and it's not something that really works without having a clear memory of what happened in the previous movies. So even though it worked, it's something that did backfire in this way. Another flaw would be the very trite and perfunctory lines and dialogue that do make some visually and emotionally arresting scenes have a bit of an unintentional humor to them, including what seems like a very obsessive need to continually quip and crack wise about the nature of comics. But like I said, that's general M. Night stuff, so I guess we came in expecting that. And honestly, that's really about it. I guess I could say that it was a disappointment that we didn't get a real sequel for David Dunn, which is true, we didn't. This isn't, like I said, a sequel where we're talking more about his adventures. In the end though, it's something that would have been nice, but overall wasn't needed. Which brings me to the last criticisms this movie has fallen under, and they're all huge spoilers, so this would be your last chance to get to the time code. The first of these two would be the complaint that everyone dies. Mr. Glass, David, Kevin, and the previous 2 films were marred by this and made pointless. I couldn't disagree more. Mr. Glass and David's role in this movie were more as the old guard, the characters at the end of their time in rope, and so had the least active roles in the movie. David's screen time even being dwarfed by secondary characters. So it does make sense to think that because of that, the fact that they die means that they weren't done any justice. But the opposite is true. David's life is the emotional backbone of the story. His losses, his family, his bonds are what give the movie life and create a running emotional thread, all the way even to the last scene. Mr. Glass and Kevin are tragic characters that are meant to be understood and pitied. But David is the one we're meant to invest in, and his son is the one we're meant to engage with and really connect with. And the movie plays this all to the hilt. I was honestly really shaken and moved by some of the sequences in this that tie into it. The second complete spoiler for the movie would be something that I am more reluctant to defend. The criticism is that of introducing the idea that there existed some kind of secret Illuminati type organization that has existed for thousands of years, that have been systematically killing off or locking up all superheroes whenever they appear. It's just really silly. It really is. It's inextricably important to the finale, but it's goofy as hell. They don't linger on it too much though. It's really more of a plot device, but it does make for an incongruent piece of this final movie when the first two relied heavily on a sort of magic realism to get the superheroic elements across. So yeah, that was an odd duck. Other than that, Glass didn't live up to any expectations I had, but it made me realize that the movie I had been imagining in my head, which might have been fun, but I doubt I would have been as involved and moved by it. Glass is not perfect. And I feel like with some of his films, it will be a while before the prevailing attitude for this movie will shift toward recognizing all the good it had. But I am glad to have watched it, and glad this trilogy as a whole exists. I can't wait for the inevitable Shout Factory box set, because I'm going to buy that stat. 2 thumbs up. And so if you skip to the time code, you should have been dropped off here. And so let's start off with my spoiler-free mini review. And well, to put it short, it's a great finale to the superhero saga. It has everything about M. Night's style of filmmaking that works, and it has it in spades. Unfortunately, it doesn't work as its own movie, relying too much on the previous movies for content and leverage. And some of the bad aspects of M. Night's filmmaking do creep in and do mar a couple of scenes. However, strong performances, actual sequences, and emotionally stirring storytelling make this a worthy ending to M. Night's superhero trilogy. 2 thumbs up. And now, last on what I watched this week is, well, Gotham. I didn't have time to watch Deadly Class. I'll be folding it in next week if a general series review. This episode of Gotham is episode number 3, and it is called Penguin, Our Hero. And it's a bit better than the second episode. Still, it's not capturing that crazy, wild insanity and chaos that Gotham really should be known for by now, but it has a lot of great performances and sequences and little set pieces that just make me smile a lot. It once again brings Penguin and James Gordon back together as this odd couple pair up that they've always been since like season 1, and puts them through the ringer together, and it's honestly pretty hilarious. There's one scene where they're locked together in a cage and have their hands tied behind their back, and they have to shimmy down to get like the only shiv that they have in order to cut themselves free, and they have to do it back to back, and it's honestly insanely good. The rest of the episode is really more focused though on Bruce and Selina trying to track down the Joker, and it's okay. I think that they could have done a lot more of this. This plot didn't have to happen throughout the episode. It could have been tightened up, maybe shown a bit more sparsely, but it takes up a lot of the runtime, and the content it has isn't really that all-involving. The fact that Bruce stays around so long to fall under the sway of Selina, not really knowing that, of course, she'd be looking for revenge and only revenge, kind of takes too long, and that's a shame. But overall, I still enjoyed some parts of this, especially the whole kind of maniacal idea that Jeremiah has taken over this church and has installed stained glass windows with him on it, and it's goddamn great. What's more notable about this subplot is, as many news sites have already reported on, it introduces the Gothamverse of Harley Quinn. One thing I found really interesting is how they're trying to play her dialogue and how she speaks, because they still have all of those Harley Quinn isms, like the way that she verbally ticks or drags out words, but they play it more like very monotone and somewhat kind of like creepy, like sterile creepy vocal intonations. So it kind of works, and it just seems interesting that it's obviously written with the intent, or it's meant to like evoke the intent of the high-pitched kind of Jersey kind of like twang, but the actress is not doing it that way. So a little bit of a disjointment. I think it actually does play off really well and makes it kind of unique. But other than that, there's not really much more meat to this episode. That's pretty much all that happens. Another thing that I probably should get into is that Penguin is desperately trying to become like this savior character for the entire city, but he's honestly insanely failing at it, to the point where one of his most trusted advisors, their last words after being like shivved to death is, "Everyone hates you." And it's brilliant, and that's just so good and amazing and perfectly Gotham. But still, they're not packing in as much in these episodes as they could. They really should have more content. I think the first episode did that so well, but these ones seem to just be lacking in being able to really capitalize on. Hopefully, as the series goes on, we're going to be seeing a more of a rolling effect, but so far it's still just really kind of strained and sort of dragged out. But fingers crossed, this episode had a lot of great moments. I enjoyed watching it, and I'm still really enjoying the series. Maybe when the season is over more episodes like this, and the second episode will probably feel a lot better. This is actually the first season so far that I'm actually motivated to go back and rewatch in full, so that's an accomplishment. Fingers crossed, one thumb up, one thumb middle. Alright, so let's move on into listener questions. Our first question comes from Sunglass Pre, and their question was, how do I think the Glassverse movies compare to superhero movies that came out after Unbreakable? Notable differences or similarities from the convergent evolution of the genre? And that's a great question. It really is. And in terms of Unbreakable, I have to say that I really do think it more aligned than people would expect to its contemporaries or direct successors, because even though it has gotten this reputation of being a deconstruction of the superhero genre, it really isn't. It's just another take on it, but it plays the whole idea of the superhero origin story completely straight. I mean, yes, of course, you have it as this completely different track of, say, something along the lines of the first Superman movie or the first Batman movie, but at least with the first Superman movie, that was because the first Superman movie was meant to be more of a mythic movie. That's what they always described it as. That's what Richard Donner describes it as. You get down the fable and then you worry about the story. So that movie was very much focused on how to depict a legend rather than, say, a fully fleshed out narrative with characters. Yet by the time Unbreakable came out and the whole Delusion movies that came out in that general era of comic movies, I think it stands up right next to them in terms of what it attempted to do, because even when you have characters like Spider-Man or Blade or Batman, all of them really did try in one way or another to dip around into more grounded themes and areas of actual life, even if a few of them were creating this hyper reality around them. Because I know it would be silly to say outright that something like Spider-Man, which is a giant campy Sam Raimi movie, is as grounded or as intimate as Unbreakable. Yet David Dunn, contending with his crumbling family life and imminent divorce, is not at all that dissimilar from Peter Parker facing crummy garbage NYC living situations and his deteriorating relationship with Mary Jane, at least of all to say of how Nolan portrayed Batman's effect on Bruce Wayne's psychological and emotional states. So yes, I think that it was in good company and that it is honestly very comparable to those kinds of movies. However, what was perhaps a sticking point in why this movie fell by the wayside to even M. Night's own filmography is that, much like with Lady in the Water, M. Night decided to create his own mythology, his own figures, and his own characters to play around with, which isn't that much of a general draw. So you have people eventually calling it the first in line of real-life superhero movies, something like Super or Kick-Ass or Defendor, when it's not really that either. David Dunn is a superhero, and the movie is about what that means and how he deals with it, and despite being a much more intimate movie than, say, a blockbuster, it depicts its themes, its conflicts with the same cinematic quality that any of those other aforementioned blockbusters would. The operatic score underlining the inherent grandiosity of even lifting weights or talking your son through a really difficult moment. So for that one and for that era, I would compare it quite naturally up until probably the time of the current MCU era, where making superhero movies much more poppy and much more in line with comic aesthetics has become the prevailing trend. So it's very much different from those, and I can see it now in terms of style, in terms of atmosphere, and in terms of emotional focus. That's pretty much that about Unbreakable. But with Split, however, that is a much different beast. I wouldn't compare it to any superhero movie or comic movie in general, outside of maybe an EC comic. It draws so much more from horror movies, from the claustrophobic atmosphere and style to the outlandish and monstrous premise, which is probably why it was so much more well received than its predecessor. It came at around the right time to be different enough to catch a lot of attention, because you have all these MCU movies and comic movies in general trying to be one way, that you have the undeniable novelty of a superhero movie that's also a horror movie. And as of now, that's a novelty that remains unbroken. We'll see how the James Gunn produced Brightburn plays out, but Split, for all of its flaws, had the luxury to actually be a response to the genre, and so stands directly outside any attempt to pigeonhole. Unbreakable was just too early and too similar to stand out at first glance. And so when we get to Glass, it's not something that even relates to superhero movies as a whole anymore. It's not part of either a rising wave, and it's not something that's set out to be unique from them. It's a movie that is about itself and the others in its series. It's a film that is a reaction to and recapitulation of its own trilogy, which is why it misses the mark of mainstream appeal that superhero movies are enjoying right now, I think. It's not the apotheosis of already established pop cultural icons or rebrandings of characters and analog figures that we all all already know about, but to once again bring Lady in the Water into this, being simply about this new mythos that M. Night has created for himself. Unlike the movie I'm comparing it to, however, Glass has the buttressing and setup to make the dialogue it's having with itself understandable and engaging. So while Unbreakable and Split have clear tethers to the evolution of superhero movies, Glass really doesn't. If there were any comparisons to be made, it might be as the concluding movie in a trilogy, and compared to the rest that have gone on, it's actually really satisfying, but also contradictorily as underwhelming as some of the best of them can be. What really sets this trilogy apart is that, for the most part, it's been branded, and rightfully so, as the first superhero movie trilogy, all done by one guy. While Unbreakable, of course, had studio input, Split and Glass were financed entirely by M. Night and are his singular vision. So I don't think that there's really one other superhero movie trilogy that has been able to capture that same sort of essence of an idea. And whether or not it works for you or it doesn't, I think that's something that's honestly going to be, or hopefully going to be seen as, a definite benchmark in the history of superhero movies, because it honestly deserves it. I thought it was really great, and I just want to get that out again in case anyone else skipped the review. And hopefully we get to see more of these actual pieces that are done aside from standard cookie cutter formula, because I did see comparisons to Black Panther and Ant-Man and calling this weak compared to them, because there is now an intellectual standard for superhero movies, and Glass fumbles and misses the mark, which just to me is itself missing the mark. But overall, yeah, I think that's pretty much it in terms of comparing it to the various eras that these movies came out in. And thank you for that question, Sunglass Pre. I think that it was really interesting, and honestly I think you could write this whole kind of video essay on it, but I'm not quite sure that I'm up to the task for that. But I really enjoyed all three movies, and I really enjoyed your questions. Thank you again. Anyway, let's move on to our second question, and it comes from the ever great Illuminated, and their question this week was, what are my general thoughts on Shyamalan filmography, also due to him being a controversial director? And well, that's a great one, and after seeing Unbreakable and Split and Glass, there's a lot of definite ideas I have. First things first, I just want to get it out there. I think my favorite movie from him that isn't Unbreakable, sometimes it jives back and forth, but it has to be The Village. And I think The Village is a beautiful movie. I really do. I'm adamant about that. And a lot of the reason for why I do think that about The Village has to do with this video essay an extra on the movie did. And I think it was on Vimeo for a while. I have no idea if it's still on there. If I find it, I'll put a link in the description. But he describes the whole process of working on it, but also talks about how the movie was received, but also just a lot of the deeper themes of the movie in terms of parenthood and family. And after knowing the twist and not being impressed with the movie that much, like when I first saw it as a kid, when I rewatched it years later, and after having seen this video essay, it really reshaped that movie for me, because a lot of things that they bring up in that essay, they're valid. They really are. The whole sort of long take of it, of the elders, the older generation, and the parents and grandparents of so many of the other characters. It's very thrilling. It's really dramatic, and it's honestly insanely harrowing that they have to stay adamant about this, because even if one of them does regret it, how could they go about it without destroying the lives of their families and the ones that they did this for and the ones that they love? It would be catastrophic. So they're kind of trapped in this kind of prison they made. Such a great movie, and the performances by Bryce Dallas Howard and Joaquin Phoenix, they're so amazing, because they're these incredibly innocent characters. And when looking at it through the perspective of already knowing the twist and seeing the elder characters for what they are, it becomes apparent that they babied these characters to the extent that they become very childlike. And it adds so much to that movie, and I think that's really wonderful, and I felt so much for the characters, for the tragedy that encircles every single aspect about it, from the opening scenes where we have the funeral of a child to that child's grandfather being like distraught and just completely on the edge because he knows it's fake. So yeah, no, it's great. It really is. Another one that really does come to mind is Lady in the Water, which does get a lot of deserved flack, because despite the great premise, it is a very cold movie, and it didn't need to be. We have the core themes of kind of imagination and being able to express that creativity, that imagination, what that can mean, power of belief, and storytelling itself. Themes and ideas that have been used to great effect many times before. Yet, like I said, this movie is just so sterile, shot without any semblance of whimsy or fantasy for the most part, that you might think should come with the premise of a fairy tale coming to life and assorted various people struggling to play their roles in the story. None of this is helped by the weird decision to make the fairy tale some strange and unknown one that M. Night made up himself. I think that version actually got a storybook style release to tie in with the movie, but had it been an actually familiar story, that would have gone a long way to tethering a strong connection to the audience. The tagline, "Time is running out for a happy ending," hits every marker this movie couldn't. I would like to remake this movie solely on the strength of that tagline. It's wonderful, it really is. As for a few of his other works that I haven't mentioned, there are some that I probably won't go much into, like The Sixth Sense, The Happening, or After Earth. I really don't have much to say about them. The Sixth Sense is good, but it doesn't have this incredibly blunt core that speaks out to me and makes me want to engage with it on a deeper level. The Happening and After Earth I can barely remember. And I just forgot about The Last Airbender, which is why I didn't list it before then. And The Visit. So I'm going to cap this off with Signs, which isn't the most auspicious final point, but it works well enough. The movie gets a lot of derision, some justified, but a lot of that feels like it's narrowing in on the unimportant, like the whole water thing. Is it dumb if you think about it for a second? Yes. But the movie is just so engaging that the few times I actually rewatched it, I never really think about it. The tension and suspense surrounding the aliens and the powerhouse that is the loss of faith theme keep that from meaning much at all to me. To me, the water only really matters in the context of the holy water. That he's regained his faith and that it scarring and defeating the alien, or at least helping to, is the focal point of everything. That's just so much more at the forefront. And M. Night and Gibson's talents combined managed to make that insanely stirring to me. And overall, honestly, if you didn't freak out during the footage of the birthday party scene, then you have nerds of fucking steel. So yeah, his filmography might not be the best, and some of his greater films might have a lot of flaws themselves, but it's an interesting film log. Despite my general boredom of a chunk of them, people still chuckle at the killer win chasing Mark Wahlberg. So whatever works. He's controversial for sure, but I'm glad he was around and did a few movies that really did speak out to me and really did have an effect on me, and that's all you can really hope for with movies. So thank you for that question, Illuminated, and I hope I answered it to the best of your satisfaction. I had a lot of fun talking about these. Thanks so much. Anyway, that's it for listener questions. As always, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone out there who sent in questions, comments, or topics, or even feedback. It means so much to me, and I really do appreciate it. It's amazing, and it's so humbling, and I'm so grateful that we're still heading strong into 2019. And if you have any of your own questions, comments, or thoughts you want to hear discussed on the show, you can always contact me on Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN. And I want to give a shout out to the cover artist for the show at DOTEMCEE. Check them out. They really do deserve it. Anyway, that's it for this week. I hope you have a good one, and see you next time.